I still remember that day like it was yesterday, the day my world shattered into 1,000 pieces, and yet, somehow, it also marked the beginning of a new chapter I never thought I'd live to see. My husband's funeral had ended just hours before. The cold, gray sky matched the weight pressing on my chest as I sat silently in the passenger seat of my son's car. We hadn't spoken much on the drive. The silence was thick, uncomfortable, and every minute felt like it stretched into an eternity. I thought he'd at least offer some comfort, or even a simple word to acknowledge the storm of grief we both carried. But no, instead, he looked straight ahead with cold eyes, the kind of look that says he's already made up his mind about me. When we reached a narrow, dusty road on the outskirts of town, he slowed down and then stopped. I turned to him, puzzled, heart-pounding. Before I could say anything, he said with a voice as cold and sharp as broken glass, "This is where you get off, Mom. The house and the business, they're mine now." I blinked, not sure I heard him right. My son, the boy I raised, the boy who once held my hand on his first day of school, was telling me I wasn't welcome anymore. No phone, no money, no plan. Just this deserted road, the burning sun above, and an uncertain future. He didn't even look back as he drove away. His car disappeared down that long road, leaving me standing there clutching my bag, my heart in my throat, feeling more alone than I ever had before. And for a moment I thought I was finished, broken beyond repair, but deep inside something stirred, a quiet, fierce flame that refused to die. Because what he didn't know, what he could never have guessed, was that this wasn't the end of my story. Not by a long shot. Before his father got sick, before the cancer stole his breath and left our family shattered, I had already started planning. Planning not just for survival, but for justice, for truth. For the day I'd stand tall again, with my head held high, and show them all what a mother scorned is capable of. You see, grief can either bury you or fuel you, and I chose the latter. I remember the way the dust swirled around my feet as I stood there, stunned and abandoned. The sun beat down mercilessly, but it wasn't the heat that burned, it was the betrayal. My own son, the person I had poured every ounce of love and hope into, had just cast me aside like an old, forgotten relic. And yet, as I clutched my bag tightly, something inside me snapped not in defeat, but in fierce determination. You might think that after losing your husband, the person who promised to be your partner through every storm, you'd expect kindness from your children, that they'd band together, grieve with you, protect you, but that's not how it was for me. Instead, the man I helped raise was ready to take everything and leave me with nothing, not even the courtesy of a phone call or a goodbye. But before his father got sick, before the cancer took his last breath, I had made a quiet, secret decision. I had begun to fight not out loud, not with anger or tears, but with strategy. While he and I sat pretending everything was fine, I was quietly building a life insurance plan, a legal safety net, and gathering proof of the many things he thought I never knew about. My husband's business, the house, it all had strings attached, contracts, documents, things my son overlooked in his rush to claim the prize. That dusty road where he left me was not the end of my journey. It was the moment I realized freedom comes wrapped in unexpected pain. I was alone, yes, but no longer a victim, no longer someone who would be pushed around by those who thought they had all the power. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I had no phone, no money, no way to call for help. The world felt cold and unwelcoming, but with every morning that came, I felt a stronger fire within. I contacted old friends, reached out to distant relatives, and began rebuilding piece by piece. And through every struggle, I whispered to myself, "This is your fight now, Emily. You will rise." What my son didn't understand was that I wasn't as helpless as I seemed. I had learned from my husband's business dealings. I knew how to fight legal battles, how to stand up in boardrooms filled with men who thought a woman was just an obstacle. And most importantly, I knew how to never give up. That first night alone on that remote road, I sat under the stars, the silence wrapping around me like a thick blanket. The world felt so vast and cold, but inside me, a storm was brewing, one that would not be silenced. I thought about my husband's gentle smile, the life we built together, and the son I once knew. Somewhere along the way, that son had changed. His heart had hardened, or maybe it was the lure of power that blinded him. Whatever the reason, I knew I couldn't rely on anyone but myself now. The next morning, with a cracked but determined voice, I borrowed an old phone from a kind stranger passing by. That phone call was the first step in a battle that would test every part of me. I reached out to a lawyer I had trusted for years, someone my husband had worked with, someone who believed in justice and in me. With every document we uncovered, a new piece of the puzzle fell into place. The house, the business things weren't as simple as my son had thought. There were clauses, protections, insurance policies. I wasn't just a discarded widow. I was a rightful owner, a fighter with a legacy to protect. But this was not just about property or money. It was about respect, about proving that a mother's love and strength are not to be underestimated. My son thought leaving me with nothing meant I was powerless. He was wrong. Days turned into weeks. I found strength I never knew I had. I learned to stand firm, to speak loudly when my voice shook inside. I fought not just in courtrooms, but in every moment I faced myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was bruised but unbroken. And the more I fought, the more I realized that the greatest victory would not be the house or the business. It would be reclaiming my dignity and my life. The courtroom felt cold and intimidating, filled with men in suits who barely glanced at me as I walked in, clutching my papers like armor. But I wasn't there to plead. I was there to claim what was rightfully mine. Every time my son's lawyer sneered or tried to belittle me, I stood taller, my voice growing stronger. They expected a grieving widow to break, to give up. What they didn't see was the fire behind my eyes, the fire fueled by years of love, sacrifice, and now, a fierce will to survive. Outside the courtroom, whispers followed me. Some pitied me, others doubted me, but I didn't care. I was no longer the broken woman left on that dusty road. I was Emily Parker, the woman who refused to be erased. My son didn't just try to steal my home or business. He tried to steal my story, my identity. But with every step, I took back control. I uncovered secrets, agreements he forged without my knowledge, manipulations he believed would give him the upper hand. But I had proof, evidence, and the truth was my strongest weapon. At night, when the house was quiet, I would walk through the rooms filled with memories, our family photos, the laughter frozen in time on the walls. I thought about my husband and the life we built together. I promised him I wouldn't let our legacy be destroyed by greed or betrayal. The journey wasn't easy. There were moments I wanted to scream, to collapse, but each tear shed watered the seed of my comeback. Friends and strangers became my lifeline, reminding me I wasn't alone. Slowly, the community that once saw me as vulnerable began to see me as unstoppable. And through it all, the hardest lesson I learned was forgiveness, not for them, but for me. Forgiving my son didn't mean forgetting, but it freed me from the chains of bitterness. I chose freedom over hatred, strength over sorrow. Days turned into months, and the fight became more than just about reclaiming property or proving who was right. It became a journey of rediscovery, of who I was beneath the weight of grief and betrayal. Each morning I woke up with a new resolve, the fire in my heart burning brighter than the pain that tried to consume me. I remember one particularly cold morning when I sat alone in the kitchen, the silence almost deafening. The house felt empty, like a shell of the life we once had. But in that silence, I found clarity. I realized that the house wasn't just walls and furniture. It was a symbol of my strength, my history, my family. Losing it wasn't an option. I began to rebuild not just the legal battles or the business, but myself. I joined support groups, met women who had been betrayed and abandoned, who understood the kind of loneliness that feels like a physical ache. Their stories became my armor, their courage my inspiration. Slowly, I started to dream again. I started planning for a future that wasn't just about survival, but about thriving. I reopened the small bakery my husband and I had started years ago, the one my son wanted to sell without a second thought. It was my sanctuary, a place where flour and sugar became symbols of hope and resilience. Each loaf I baked, every customer I smiled at, was a step away from the shadow my son had cast over my life. The business grew, the community rallied around me, and with every success, I felt a piece of my old self come back to life. Stronger, wiser, unbreakable. But the real victory wasn't in winning back the house or the business. It was in winning back my dignity, my voice, and most importantly, my peace. I often think back to that dusty road where he left me. I was broken then, yes, but standing there, clutching my bag, I never imagined I'd be here today standing tall, proud, and free. And if there's one thing I want anyone listening to know, it's this. No matter how dark the road ahead seems, you have the power to rise, to fight, to reclaim your life, because sometimes being left behind is the very thing that sets you free. The more I rebuilt my life, the more I understood that true strength isn't just about standing alone. It's about rising despite being knocked down, about healing wounds that no one else sees, about finding light where darkness once ruled. There were mornings when grief came crashing back, uninvited and overwhelming. I'd wake up with tears soaking my pillow, haunted by memories of my husband's smile, my son's betrayal. But instead of letting those moments swallow me whole, I began to write letters I never sent, words that poured out like a river, raw and honest. Writing became my therapy, my way to face the pain and turn it into power. I reached out to others who had faced similar betrayals, women whose children had turned against them, men left alone to pick up shattered lives. Their stories echoed mine, but their strength inspired me to keep moving forward. We became a quiet network of warriors, each fighting battles no one else could see. Meanwhile, the legal fight dragged on, court dates, lawyers' meetings, endless paperwork. Each setback threatened to break me, but I had learned to bend without breaking. When my son's lawyers tried to smear my character, I held my head high. When they dismissed me as a grieving widow who didn't understand business, I fought harder. I learned to negotiate, to stand firm, to use every ounce of knowledge my husband had shared with me over the years. Slowly, the truth came to light. His father had hidden things my son never expected. I had leverage, evidence, and the law on my side. But beyond the courtrooms, the emotional battle was just as fierce. My relationship with my son was shattered, and some days I mourned not just my husband, but the son I thought I knew. I longed for reconciliation, but knew I had to protect myself first. So I focused on what I could control. The bakery became my sanctuary, a place where I poured love into every loaf, every pastry. Customers became friends. The community rallied around me, not because of pity, but because they saw my strength, my determination. One day, a woman came into the bakery and told me her own story of betrayal and survival. We hugged, tears flowing freely, two strangers bound by shared pain and resilience. That moment reminded me that no matter how lonely the road seemed, I was never truly alone. As the months turned into a year, I realized something profound. I was no longer the woman left on that dusty road. I was Emily Parker, survivor, fighter, mother, and now a beacon of hope for others who felt abandoned and broken. And if my story teaches anyone anything, it's this. Even when the people you love turn away, even when you feel lost and powerless, you have a fire inside that can never be extinguished. You just have to find the courage to let it burn. As the seasons changed, so did I. What once was a woman crushed by grief and betrayal gradually transformed into someone unrecognizable even to myself. I was no longer the scared widow left stranded on a remote road. I was a force to be reckoned with. The hardest part wasn't winning the house back or securing the business that was rightfully mine. The hardest part was facing my son. That man who had once been my little boy, now a stranger, hardened by greed and ambition. Every time I saw him in court or heard his name whispered in conversations, a part of my heart shattered anew. But I refused to let anger consume me. I realized that revenge was not about destruction. It was about reclaiming my life on my own terms. I wanted him to see that no matter what he tried, he couldn't break me. That the woman he tried to discard had risen stronger, fiercer, and more determined than ever. There were moments I doubted myself, long nights when loneliness crept in, when the weight of loss threatened to suffocate my spirit. But I found strength in the small victories. A signed legal document, a supportive friend's call, a customer's warm smile at the bakery counter. I poured everything I had into rebuilding. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was my sanctuary, my therapy, my reminder that life could be sweet even after the bitterest betrayals. Each loaf of bread, each cake, was a symbol of my resilience. And with every satisfied customer, my confidence grew. The community that once viewed me as a grieving widow began to see me as a woman who refused to be silenced. Invitations to speak at local groups and support meetings came, and I found a new purpose: to help others facing betrayal, abandonment, and loss. My story became a beacon of hope for many, proof that even when the people you love turn their backs, you can still find your way back to yourself. And then came the day that surprised me most, the day my son reached out, his voice shaky, unsure. He didn't ask for forgiveness outright, but there was a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. I knew our relationship might never be what it once was, but a door had opened. I told him I wasn't the same woman he'd tried to leave behind. I was stronger, wiser, and unafraid. I had fought battles he didn't even know existed, battles not just for property or money, but for dignity, for love, for survival. In the end, that dusty road wasn't just a place where I was abandoned. It was where I found myself. I want you to feel every single moment I lived the confusion, the hurt, the fierce resolve that took root deep inside me. After that phone call from my son, the one where he told me, in so many words, that I was no longer part of his plans, I realized something profound. Blood doesn't always mean family. Love doesn't always mean loyalty. But the strength I found in that realization became the foundation of everything I rebuilt. For weeks after being left on that remote road, I wandered through the rooms of our once happy home, each corner echoing with memories that felt like a heavy weight. I thought about all the sacrifices my husband and I made to build this life. The late nights, the hard work, the dreams we shared. And I understood that what my son didn't grasp was that the house and the business were more than just assets. They were the legacy of love and endurance that could never be simply handed over or taken away. I threw myself into fighting for that legacy. The legal battles were grueling, Every meeting with lawyers felt like walking through fire. My son's team was relentless, trying to paint me as a vulnerable woman unfit to manage what was rightfully his. But I fought harder than I ever thought possible. I wasn't just fighting for a house or a business. I was fighting to prove to myself that I was still whole, still capable, still worthy. There were moments when exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole. Nights spent awake, heart pounding, mind racing with worries about what the future held. Yet I found small moments of grace, a smile from a neighbor, a handwritten note from a loyal customer at the bakery, the soft warmth of morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. That reminded me I was not alone, and slowly, piece by piece, I began to rebuild. The bakery reopened, not just as a business, but as a symbol of my resilience. Each loaf of bread I baked carried a piece of my soul, each cake a testament to hope rising from the ashes of despair. The community's support wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, reminding me that strength is often found in connection. Even as I rebuilt my life, I struggled with the void left by my son's absence. The silence between us was deafening. Yet I held on to a fragile hope that one day he might see the woman I had become, the woman he tried to discard, but who refused to be broken. That dusty road where he left me was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of my transformation. A place where pain gave way to power, betrayal to bravery. And if there is one truth I want to share, it is this: no matter how dark the night, the dawn will come, and with it the promise of a new beginning. The seasons shifted again, and with each passing day, I could feel the weight of the past loosening its grip on my soul. The woman who once stood alone on that dusty road was changing, evolving into someone who embraced her scars as proof of survival rather than shame. The pain was still there, yes, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it fueled the fire burning inside, urging me forward. Rebuilding the bakery became a metaphor for rebuilding myself. Flour dusted my hands, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air, a reminder that life, like dough, could rise again even after being pressed down. I poured my heart into every recipe, every customer interaction, transforming my pain into passion. The community noticed. People came not only for the food, but for the story behind it, the story of a woman who refused to be defeated. There were days when loneliness crept in like a shadow, especially when I walked past the empty chair where my husband used to sit, or the quiet corner where my son once laughed. I wondered if he ever thought about the woman he had left behind, the battles she was fighting alone. But I learned to find peace in the silence, filling it with music, with hope, with prayers whispered in the dark. And then came the unexpected. A letter slipped under my door, penned in my son's shaky handwriting. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall he had built between us. He spoke of regret, confusion, and a desire to understand what had truly happened before his father's death. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the boy he used to be, the one I had raised with love and sacrifice. I didn't know if we could rebuild what was broken, but I knew I was ready to try, not because I needed his forgiveness, but because holding on to anger would only keep me chained to the past. Forgiveness, I realized, was a gift I gave myself, a way to move forward without being weighed down. That dusty road, once a symbol of abandonment and pain, had become a marker of my journey back to strength, dignity, and hope. I wasn't the woman left behind. I was the woman who rose. And if there's one thing I want you to remember from my story, it's this: no matter how deep the betrayal, how dark the night, there is always a way back to the light. Sometimes it begins with a single step forward, even if that step is taken alone. The days that followed the letter were filled with a mixture of hope and hesitation. My son's words opened a door that I had thought forever sealed shut, but walking through it meant confronting wounds that ran deep. We arranged to meet, not in a courtroom, but in a quiet cafe where the noise of the world could soften the edges of our pain. Sitting across from him, I saw the vulnerability hidden beneath his guarded exterior. The boy I once knew was buried beneath layers of resentment and fear. We didn't speak of blame or bitterness right away. Instead, we talked about memory's small moments that once brought us joy, laughter shared over simple dinners, quiet evenings spent planning a future none of us could have predicted. He told me about the confusion he felt when his father got sick, how anger had clouded his judgment, how he'd acted out of fear of losing everything. I shared my own grief, my loneliness, and the strength it took to fight for a life that seemed to be slipping through my fingers. It wasn't an easy conversation, far from it. Tears were shed, voices cracked, and silence settled between us more than once. But beneath the pain, something fragile began to grow, an understanding, a tentative bridge reaching across the divide. Over time, those meetings became more frequent. We began to rebuild a relationship, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, misunderstandings, moments when old wounds reopened. But each time we chose to try again. I realized that forgiveness wasn't a one-time act but a journey, one that required patience, courage, and the willingness to see beyond the hurt. And in forgiving my son, I found a freedom I hadn't known I needed, a release from the bitterness that once threatened to consume me. Through it all, I kept building my life, my bakery, my friendships, my newfound purpose as a speaker and advocate for women who, like me, had faced betrayal and loss. I found strength in my story, power in my voice, and peace in the knowledge that I had reclaimed my life on my own terms. That dusty road, once a symbol of abandonment, had become a testament to resilience. And as I stand here today, I know that no matter what challenges lie ahead, I have the courage to face them. Looking back, that dusty road where my son left me feels less like a place of abandonment and more like a crossroads, a moment when everything changed. I was broken that day, yes, but I wasn't defeated. I was raw, vulnerable, and yet fierce. And that fierce spirit is what carried me through the darkest chapters of my life. The battles I fought, legal, emotional, and spiritual, were not easy. They demanded every ounce of strength I had, and then some. But each struggle taught me something invaluable. That true power lies not in control over others, but in control over yourself. It lies in choosing dignity over despair, courage over fear. Reclaiming the house and the business was important, but far more important was reclaiming my identity as a woman who refuses to be erased. I became more than a widow abandoned. I became a survivor, a fighter, a mother who found the courage to forgive without forgetting. My relationship with my son is still healing, a delicate thread that requires care and patience, but I hold on to hope that one day we'll bridge the gap fully. Until then, I carry no bitterness, only a deep understanding that sometimes people break in ways we cannot see, and love sometimes means letting go while holding on in your heart. To anyone listening who feels betrayed, abandoned, or crushed by loss, I want you to know this: your story isn't over. Your darkest moments can birth your greatest strength. You are more powerful than you realize, and sometimes being left alone is the very thing that sets you free. So, to the woman standing alone on her own dusty road, clutching a bag and wondering what comes next, I'm here to tell you, the journey ahead is yours to write, and it can be a story of hope, redemption, and unbreakable courage, because sometimes when the world turns its back, that's when you discover who you really are. Looking back, that dusty road where my son left me feels less like a place of abandonment and more like a crossroads, A moment when everything changed. I was broken that day, yes, but I wasn't defeated. I was raw, vulnerable, and yet fierce, and that fierce spirit is what carried me through the darkest chapters of my life. The battles I fought, legal, emotional, and spiritual, were not easy. They demanded every ounce of strength I had, and then some. But each struggle taught me something invaluable. That true power lies not in control over others, but in control over yourself. It lies in choosing dignity over despair, courage over fear. Reclaiming the house and the business was important, but far more important was reclaiming my identity as a woman who refuses to be erased. I became more than a widow abandoned. I became a survivor, a fighter, a mother who found the courage to forgive without forgetting. My relationship with my son is still healing, a delicate thread that requires care and patience. But I hold on to hope that one day we'll bridge the gap fully. Until then, I carry no bitterness, only a deep understanding that sometimes people break in ways we cannot see, and love sometimes means letting go while holding on in your heart. To anyone listening who feels betrayed, abandoned, or crushed by loss, I want you to know this. Your story isn't over. Your darkest moments can birth your greatest strength. You are more powerful than you realize, and sometimes being left alone is the very thing that sets you free. So, to the woman standing alone on her own dusty road, clutching a bag and wondering what comes next, I'm here to tell you, the journey ahead is yours to write, and it can be a story of hope, redemption, and unbreakable courage, because sometimes, when the world turns its back, that's when you discover who you really are. If you've ever felt abandoned, betrayed, or left to face life's storms alone, remember this story because you are not alone. Your pain can become your power. Your darkest days can lead to your brightest dawn. If Emily's journey touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories of strength, courage, and redemption. And if you're facing your own battles right now, drop a comment below. We're here to listen, to support, and to remind you that no matter what, you can rise. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, keep fighting, and never forget, your story is far from over.